We want to be able to peacefully start a new state for the same reason we want a bare plot of earth, a blank sheet of paper, an empty text buffer, a fresh startup, or a clean slate. Because we want to build something new without historical constraint. The most conventional way to start a new country involves winning sufficient power in an election to either A, rewrite the laws of an existing state, or B, carve out a new one from scratch with the recognition of the international community. This is the most widely discussed path, and by far the most crowded, too crowded. The second obvious way is a political revolution. We don't advise attempting this. The third conventional way to form a new state is to win a war. We don't advise attempting this either. A war is, of course, not independent from the other two. Indeed, both elections and revolutions can lead to wars that end up carving out new polities. 4. Micronations. The most obvious of the unconventional approaches occurs when an eccentric plants a flag on an offshore platform or disputed patch of dirt and declares themselves king of nothing. If the issue with elections is that too many people care about them, the issue with these so-called micronations is that too few people care. Because a state, like a currency, is an inherently social affair. A few people in the middle of nowhere won't be able to organize a military, enforce laws, or be recognized by other countries. Moreover, while an existing state may be content to let people harmlessly laugh a fake country in their backyard, an actual threat to sovereignty typically produces a response with real guns, whether that be the Falklands or Sakhalin. 5. Seasteading. Seasteading essentially starts with the observation that cruise ships exist and asks whether we could move from a few weeks on the water at a time to semi-permanent habitation in international waters, with frequent docking, of course. If the cost of cruise ships falls, this approach becomes more feasible. But while there are individuals who live on cruise ships year-round, we haven't yet seen a scaled example. 6. Space. Perhaps the most prestigious of the start a new country paths is the idea of colonizing other planets. Unlike seasteading or micronations, space exploration started at the government level and has been glamorized in many movies and TV shows, so it enjoys a higher degree of social acceptability. This path is typically received as temporarily technically infeasible rather than outright crazy. SpaceX is one entity seriously contemplating the logistics of starting a new state on Mars. 7. Network state. And finally, we arrive at our preferred method, the network state. Our idea is to proceed cloud first, land last. Rather than starting with the physical territory, we start with the digital community. We create a startup society, organize it into a network union, crowdfund the physical nodes of a network archipelago, and, in the fullness of time, eventually negotiate for diplomatic recognition to become a true network state. We build the embryonic state as an open source project. We organize our internal economy around remote work. We cultivate in-person levels of civility. We simulate architecture in VR. And we create art and literature that reflects our values. When we crowdfund territory in the real world, it's not necessarily contiguous territory, because an underappreciated fact is that the internet allows us to network enclaves. Put another way, a network archipelago need not acquire all its territory in one place at one time. It can connect 1,000 apartments, 100 houses, and a dozen cul-de-sacs in different cities into a new kind of fractal polity with its capital in the cloud. Community members migrate between these enclaves and crowdfund territory nearby, with every individual dwelling and group house presenting an independent opportunity for expansion. And with 1,000 such enclaves rather than 4 directions to expand north, east, south, and west, there are more like 4,000. The main difference between the seventh method, network states, and the previous six is that the seventh straddles the boundary between practicality and impracticality. It is now feasible to build million-person online communities, start billion-dollar digital currencies, and architect buildings in VR to then crowdfund into reality. The network state concept stacks together many existing technologies rather than requiring the invention of new ones. At the same time, it avoids the obvious pathways of election, revolution, and war, all of which turn ugly, and none of which provide much venue for individual initiative. In other words, the network state takes the most robust existing tech stack we have, namely the suite of technologies built around the internet, and uses it to route around political roadblocks without waiting for future physical innovation. With sufficiently good technology, we might be able to escape these political roadblocks and reopen not just a digital frontier, but a physical one, on remote pieces of land, on the sea, and eventually in space.
When we look back in history to the earlier waves of colonization that have occurred, the thing that's impressive about them is that it wasn't the rich and the famous who migrated. It was people who felt that in the surroundings they came from, there wasn't enough room for their creativity, their expansion, their freedom, their chance to do their own thing, their chance simply to make a decent living for themselves and to support their families.
What's little known is that Columbus's voyage to the New World was in part driven by the Ottoman blockade of the Eastern Mediterranean. It was an attempt to find an alternative path to India around the Ottomans. But it ended up using technology to reopen the frontier in the face of political roadblocks. From 1492 to 1890, Europeans had what they considered a frontier. It started with transatlantic navigation and the discovery of the New World, then proceeded to European colonialism, and from there to the independence of the US and Western expansion via manifest destiny. Towards the end of this period, authors like Charles Nordhoff in Communistic Societies of the United States noted how important the frontier was, how bad it would be if that avenue for ambitious men was closed off, and how nasty the trade unionists were getting. Nordhoff was right. The aggression of the trade unions eventually led to the communist revolutions which killed tens of millions of people globally, led to lasting disorders and attacks upon property. We can attribute some of this to the pause, to the closing of the frontier in 1890. That closing took away paths for ambitious men and ensured that they couldn't easily become founders on their own plot of land. They had to become union organizers or revolutionaries or demagogues of some kind. Without the frontier, it all became zero-sum. And thus we entered the steel cage match of the 20th century between fascism, communism, and democratic capitalism. There were some important frontier-related technological developments during this period in space shuttles and cruise ships, but the frontier itself was not open. Humanity managed to survive through a bloody 20th century. After 1991, the frontier reopened as commerce on the internet was legalized. By the late 2010s, the combination of centralization and wokeification in the West and Xi-ification in China threatened to close this frontier too. But Bitcoin and Web3 and the open metaverse have given the digital frontier a new lease on life. Today, if we assess where we're at, there are four possibilities for the frontier: the land, the internet, the sea, and space. Right now, there are 7.7 billion people on land, 3.2 billion on the internet, about 2 to 3 million on the high seas, and less than 10 currently in space. So, practically speaking, an internet frontier is easier than the other three. If we're lucky, we'll be able to use the concepts from the network state to reopen the physical frontier through a hybrid internet and land strategy. To summarize, A, the period of European greatness corresponded to the open frontier from 1492 to 1890. B, the period of total war corresponded to the closing frontier from 1890 to 1991, which ushered in a necessarily zero-sum world. C, the peaceful reopening of the digital frontier could lead us again to a time of greatness. D, the American and Chinese establishments are trying to close that frontier and trap us into the same steel cage match of the 20th century. E, with sufficiently good technology, we might be able to escape these political roadblocks and reopen not just a digital frontier, but a physical one, on remote pieces of land, on the sea, and eventually in space. This is what we refer to as the Generalized Frontier Thesis.
We know that the pressure to colonize, the pressure to go into new areas, open up new places where people can live is very, very great, always has been. If we look back at the successful colonizations of the past, we see that it was largely, although not entirely, young people who came. It was people who had the courage, the guts to go and try something new. It was the people who felt that the situation they came from was, in many cases, intolerable. If we look around us at the world we live in today, increasing very, very serious problems, we see that some of the same pressures that were there before are there again. There are many people living in the world who feel that they're in places and in situations that are repressive, that don't give them an adequate scope to even make decent livings for their families, certainly not to live in freedom. When we open up the high frontier by building colonies in space and have those colonies extending farther and farther outward in our solar system, there is going to be room for people who want to leave the Earth to go out and to develop their own colonies and to do their own thing. Do their own thing not in a sense of wild abandonment or anything of that sort, because when you ask about the aspirations of people throughout the world today, they're mostly very modest aspirations: a decent living, a chance to live in freedom. Those are the basics. I think that we have to understand that at the deepest possible level, opening the high frontier means making possible and ensuring the survival of the human race.
Until this point, it was Balaji Srinivasan speaking, and closer to the end, mostly Gerard O'Neill. From here, the one speaking is the idealizer behind the Vis Pacem Ad Astra. We begin as a channel, and as outlined by Balaji, we hope to congregate people and resources in the direction we advocate for. We take the network state as a strategy that, at the time of the upload of this video, presents itself as one of the most convincing for achieving our goal. And precisely because the network state is a mean to an end for us, we shall not lose sight of our objectives. First, the promotion of the vision defended by Gerard O'Neill and by consequence the SSI, but also by many others. That space colonization is something that not only can be done in the short term, even primarily by the common folk, but also something that should be done. As the reopening of the frontier will ensue a new age of prosperity, justice, and peace. For the reasons explained by Srinivasan and O'Neill himself, our name carries this hope. Second, the congregation of people interested in space colonization. And third, and certainly the most difficult one, we hope to help in the materialization of the good space-related aspirations of people interested in space, from all over the world, into real projects that further space colonization. In particular, we at the Vis Pacem Ad Astra believe that the concept described by O'Neill, now named O'Neill cylinders, is the most optimal path for those who are willing to leave the Earth in the pursuit of a better future. The network state is at the moment a strategy we will take. But as I said, being a mean to an end, we can utilize, change to, and incorporate different frameworks and strategies when necessary. Differently than Srinivasan, we believe that the only place where a new state or a new nation can truly be stable is in space. As we believe that it is only a matter of time until the other frontiers, Earth's land, Earth's sea, and Earth's cyberspace, be completely closed and tightly controlled by existing governments. And so, we believe that we should leverage the network state concept in order to leave the Earth and build a new nation as soon as possible in space. We encourage every good people to take part in the community we look forward in building. Because, remember, we believe that the high frontier will be opened. And this means that, no matter the divergences in ideology, religion, etc., people need not fight, as long they have an ethical minimum. Because given that, they will certainly be able to find space to build their own societies in space. We all know that space holds many challenges, but certainly many riches and promises as well. And although it may seem like a distant dream still, we must remember the words by Robert Goddard. It is difficult to say what is impossible, for the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and see Vis Pacem Ad Astra.